The calm of the countryside shattered under a moonless night. The air was thick with silence, only broken by the distant chirp of crickets, unaware of the unfolding drama. It was a night just like any other for old farmer Jacob, who, nestled into his rickety farmhouse, felt the warmth of the crackling fire. Little did he know that a plan was brewing in the shadows, a plan orchestrated by thieves who thought they could outsmart him. As the clock struck midnight, two figures cloaked in darkness slunk down the gravel road toward Jacob's property, brimming with confidence. They'd scouted this farm for weeks. They knew that this place, with its sprawling cornfield swaying in the wind and clear barn filled with tools, was a treasure trove waiting to be plundered. One was taller, with a brash attitude and a smirk that cut through the dark. The other was shorter, cautious, weighing every step. They called themselves expert thieves, claiming that no lock could hold them back and no land belonged to anyone but them. With hearts racing and adrenaline pumping, they crept closer to the farmhouse, eyes darting around, scanning for any sign of alertness. Their plan was simple: slip inside, gather whatever they could, and vanish like ghosts into the night. They believed they were smart, that their city wit could easily outmaneuver a simple farmer. Little did they know that old farmer Jacob was as sharp as the edge of his scythe, and had seen more of life's tricks than they could ever imagine. Meanwhile, Jacob was restless. The gentle warmth of the fire flickered shadows on the walls. He cherished the silence, but tonight felt different. He sensed a disturbance in the night air but couldn't put his finger on it. The rustling of leaves seemed louder, the eerie hoot of an owl in the distance more foreboding. So he slipped on his old boots, the soles worn from years of labor, and quietly grabbed his trusty rifle, a companion that had seen many sunrises and defended against more than just wild animals. As the intruders approached the back of the house, they whispered their plans, full of bravado. "The barn's an easy mark," said the taller one. "It's not even locked." The shorter thief nodded, his excitement simmering just beneath the surface. They climbed the two weathered steps leading to the barn's entrance carefully, their anticipation tinged with adrenaline. But as they pushed the creaking door open, a sudden gust of wind swept through, rattling the old wood and making them jump. "This place is creepy," muttered the shorter thief, glancing over his shoulder. "Just grab what you can," the tall one snapped back, the confidence bubbling over into impatience. Inside the barn, it was a treasure trove of forgotten relics. Old tools hung from nails, spider webs clung like ghosts to every corner, and barrels filled with who knows what sat against the wall. The air smelled of hay and thyme, a stark contrast to their urban upbringing. They hurriedly stuffed their bags with whatever they could find, visions of riches dancing before their eyes. But what they didn't know was that Farmer Jacob had a plan, one that had been cultivated over years of racing against time and unpredictability. He crept closer, wary yet steady, ensuring that he stayed out of sight. Every step he took was soft as dust, a warrior of the night ready to protect his land. He had seen trespassers before. He knew their type. Just as the robbers were about to escape, Jacob made his move. He switched on a flashlight, casting a beam of blinding light into the barn. He called out, his voice booming with authority that echoed off the barn walls. It was a voice that seemed to rip through the night air, filled with the power of countless harvests. The thieves froze, caught in the act. Panic surged through them, their bravado crumbled under the weight of reality. The taller thief stammered, "We were just..." But words failed him, his confidence evaporating as quickly as the night dew. Jacob stepped into the barn, rifle held steady against his shoulder. He demanded, his voice no longer a question, but a statement that left no room for negotiation. The older man's blue eyes burned with a fierceness that could only come from a lifetime of hard work and a deep-rooted love for the land. The robbers exchanged glances, fear piercing through their bravado. We're just looking for help," the shorter one squeaked, desperation oozing from his words. Jacob raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly, not in humor, but in serious doubt. He replied. In a panic, the taller thief turned on his heel, lunging for the exit, but Jacob had anticipated their moves. He shouted, stepping forward with the quickness that belied his age. The spotlight from his flashlight danced erratically, illuminating the barn like a spotlight on a stage. "Please," the shorter robber begged, now fully aware of their impending doom. But it was too late. The game was up. Jacob advanced, his rifle still aimed at the two intruders. His voice echoed around them, a voice of righteous fury, the protectiveness of the land coursing through him. As fear drained the color from their faces, the taller thief stumbled backward, tripping over a worn-out pitchfork, panic taking the place of his bravado. The shorter one tried to make a run for it, but Jacob was quicker, closing the distance between them as if propelled by the very spirit of the soil he tended to. "I don't want to hurt you," Jacob said, a calm resolve washing over him. He lowered his rifle slightly, giving them a fleeting moment of uncertain hope. This isn't a game. The weight of Jacob's words landed heavily on them. They stood at the crossroads of their choices, the thrill of the hunt quickly turning to despair. It wasn't just about stolen goods anymore. It was about respect. Respect for those who worked hard under the sun, who tended to the land with care. Nurturing crops didn't just grow food, they enriched lives. In that moment, Jacob became the embodiment of every farmer's love, every parent's wisdom, and every elder's cautious guidance. The taller thief swallowed hard, the bravado drained from him. They were caught, and they could either fight or lay down their weapons, both of which would carry their own consequences. Surrender didn't equate to weakness. It was perhaps the first sign of growth. The shorter thief finally broke down, tears brimming in his eyes as he realized the gravity of their actions. "I didn't want this," he whispered, the truth spilling forth like a river of regret. Jacob softened slightly at the desperation in the boy's voice. "We all need money," he replied, "but you can't take it from someone else's labor. You can earn your own." With quiet dignity, he motioned toward the barn door. The thieves looked at each other, the connection of remorse now binding them tighter than any crime ever could. They scuttled out into the darkness, the weight of their regrets trailing behind like a shadow. Once outside, they hesitated, still not fully realizing the depths of what they had done. How did a simple farmer hold so much power? Still reeling, they fled into the night, minds racing, hearts pounding. As dawn broke over the horizon, Farmer Jacob returned to the hearth of his home, ensuring his doors were locked a little tighter than before. But in his heart, he felt a lesson learned. The robbers thought they could outsmart a man who worked the fields, who felt the seasons change deeply within his bones. But in that moonless night, Jacob had shown them that it wasn't just about physical strength. It was the strength of character, the power of integrity, and the root of hard work that truly owned the land. The sun peeked over the hills, pouring golden light across fields of corn that danced freely in the morning breeze. Jacob stood by his window, peering out as the day stretched before him. He knew that life would always have its challenges, but so would he, anchored firmly like an old tree with deep roots. And somewhere in a forgotten corner of the city, two robbers sat in silence, haunted by what could have been. They had underestimated not just their quarry but themselves, their dreams set against a backdrop that now felt foreign. No riches ever gained would fill the emptiness of a poorly chosen path. Those lessons in the quiet of a farmer's fields would reverberate far beyond that night, a lasting testament to both the thief's folly and the farmer's endurance. They thought they could outsmart him, but in the stark light of day, it was they who had been outplayed. And as Farmer Jacob tended to his crops, the promise of the earth renewed, he carried with him a story not just of conflict, but of redemption, a tale woven into the fabric of the land itself. The night was deceptively quiet, the kind of silence that blankets the countryside like a soft fog. But within that stillness, a tension simmered just beneath the surface. Under the cover of darkness, two figures in black made their way toward an old farmhouse, their hearts pounding with excitement and mischief. They called themselves experts, confident they could outsmart any foe, especially a simple farmer. Across the fields, Farmer Hank was well aware of the potential dangers that came with the twilight hours. While most of the townsfolk settled into their beds, he remained vigilant. Years of hard work etched into his weathered face. Hank had seen it all: storms, droughts, and the occasional threat from those who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. The farm sat like a fortress among rolling hills, illuminated by the serene glow of the stars above. Unfortunately for the two intruders, They underestimated the farmer who lived there. They envisioned a sleepy old man, perhaps dazed by age, someone who wouldn't even stir from his dreams while they raided his possessions. As they tiptoed closer to the barn, their breath quickened. Even the bats that fluttered overhead seemed to sense a growing unease. "We've got this," whispered the taller thief, his confidence swirling in the air like the smoke from a distant campfire. The shorter one nodded, a mix of excitement and fear in his eyes. "Just grab the tools." But as they creaked open the barn door, the familiar smell of hay and wood mixed with a stale odor of missed opportunities. Inside, the darkness was thick, wrapping around them like a shroud. The taller thief shone a flashlight over the cluttered space, illuminating rusty tools, stacks of old feed bags, and the worn wooden beams overhead. Yet they had one critical flaw in their plan. They didn't realize that the barn wasn't just a structure filled with forgotten items. It was Hank's pride and joy, a place where memories were made and labor turned into sustenance. The hours he spent maintaining every inch of that barn were not visible to them. They simply saw an opportunity, while he saw a lifetime of sweat and dedication. Outside, two eyes watched them closely. Hank stood, concealed by the shadows, rifle in hand, his instincts sharp as a hawk. He could hear their whispered plans and garbled excitement filled with arrogance. The moon hung low, and he could sense trouble brewing in the night air. For a fleeting moment, Hank questioned whether he should just let them take what they wanted. After all, old tools and equipment could be replaced. But deep down, he understood that it wasn't just about the physical items. It was about respect. Respect for his labor, his land, and his way of life. Hank shouted, his voice booming through the wood and hay, breaking through their shallow bravado. The initial surprise sent both intruders stumbling backward, tripping over each other as panic etched itself across their faces. The shorter thief squeaked, his bravado collapsing like a house of cards. The fear in his voice was palpable, a sharp contrast to the confidence they wore moments before. "You're trespassing," Hank replied, his eyes narrowing as he stepped forward, the beam of his flashlight pinning them in place like a spotlight on a stage. Desperation took root in the taller thief's heart. But we were just looking for some tools," he stammered, his bravado replaced by a tremor of fear. Hank's patience thinned. "You think you can waltz in here and take what's mine?" The conviction in his voice hung thick in the air. It was a warning wrapped in a challenge. In an instant, the fear in the robbers morphed into desperation. They glanced at one another, weighing their options. But while they debated their next move, Hank knew exactly what to do. He moved closer, and the shadows seemed to dance around him, amplifying his imposing figure. "I won't ask again," he intoned, power radiating from him. Terrified yet desperate, the taller thief took an impulsive step forward, lunging for the flashlight that seemed to hold all the power in that moment. But Hank was quicker. He pointed his rifle with unwavering steadiness, a guardian of his land. He commanded, the grip on his weapon tightening. The tension in the barn throbbed, while silence fell like a heavy blanket. The intruders realized too late that they weren't facing an oblivious old man, but a seasoned warrior who understood the stakes. "Listen," Hank said, his voice now lowering but no less authoritative. "You've got two choices. Leave now, or I call the sheriff." A frantic tension filled the air, every heartbeat echoing within the confines of the space. The taller thief looked to his partner, eyes filled with fear, desperation, and regret. Without a word, they edged toward the door, hesitation causing them to move slowly, as if they were walking back from the brink of a poorly imagined dream. But just before they could escape, the shorter thief paused, glancing back at Hank. "We didn't mean to cause trouble." Trailing off, the weight of their poor decisions began to sink in. Hank finished for him, the disappointment sharp in his tone. "What you need to understand is that what you consider to be easy pickings isn't about wealth at all." The realization washed over the thieves like a cold wave, the adrenaline giving way to regret. It was in this moment, standing at the edge of choice, that the taller thief found his voice. "Okay, maybe we miscalculated," he admitted, the bravado completely stripped away. "But it's been tough, we just..." Hank studied them, suddenly seeing not just two misguided criminals, but two lost souls grappling with a different kind of hardship. "Tough times don't excuse bad choices," he replied steadily. Your dignity is worth more than any stolen tool. The air crackled with honesty, standing in stark contrast to the choices hovering between theft and redemption. Hank resumed a steady position, but offered a glimpse of understanding that broke the tension, just a tiny crack, revealing a bit of compassion. The first light of dawn filtered through the barn windows, casting long shadows that danced across the floor, illuminating their faces. The reality of their night loomed large, and they began to feel as if they weren't merely robbers but something much smaller, individuals struggling to find their place in the world. Finally, the shorter thief exhaled a heavy sigh, resignation washing over him. "We'll leave. You won't see us again," he murmured, shame cloaking his voice. And with that, they slipped through the barn door, moving away from a mistake that could haunt them for a lifetime. As the sun began to climb on the horizon, Hank lowered his rifle, watching as they disappeared into the distance. The quiet of the farm returned, but it now felt different. A menacing shadow had lifted, revealing a bright new day. Hank shook his head, imposing a slight smirk. Those boys thought they could outsmart him, relying on bravado and reckless decisions. They didn't realize that wisdom and resilience had roots that ran much deeper. Life would continue its rhythm. The sun would rise again, casting warmth over the fields that bore the fruits of true labor. Farmer Hank went back to work, pulling weeds from the earth and planting seeds of hope for the future. It wasn't merely tilling soil. It was a statement of defiance towards those who saw the world only through the lens of quick gains. Days turned into weeks, and as harvest approached, the air filled with the sweet aroma of ripening corn. Hank marveled at the fruits of his labor, seeing not only the crops but a reminder of the resilience within every seed sown. Meanwhile, the two thieves returned to their lives, forever altered by that fateful night. Memories of the farmer's stern voice and piercing gaze lingered, a ghost that haunted their darker moments. They learned the hard way that respect is something earned, not stolen. For where they sought shortcuts, Hank taught them there were only pathways carved by hard work and integrity. And so, the farmer thrived, having turned a dangerous encounter into a powerful reminder of the choices we all face. Hank understood that every single day was a chance to show strength, a resolve that flourished under love for the land he tended. Against the vast backdrop of fields, the sun set, casting rays of fiery orange and soft pink across the endless sky. When darkness fell, it cradled the quiet hum of life, signaling promises that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, bravery and compassion could weave a tapestry far more remarkable than any scheme devised in shadows. In the end, they had all learned something vital. For Farmer Hank, it wasn't just about protecting his land. It was about nurturing the spirit of community, weaving the threads of humanity that bind us all together. And for the robbers, it was a lesson learned through struggle, fear, and a silent reckoning. A story passed through the winds, carried forth, forever entwined in the roots of all that is, a symbol of resilience that neither time nor hardship could ever erase. The night was thicker than a wall of fog, a cloak of darkness that whispered secrets through the fields. In the distance, the pale light of the moon barely pierced the heavy clouds, creating shadows that danced like phantoms among the corn stalks. It was the perfect night for a heist, or so two robbers thought as they crept closer to the old farmhouse, their hearts racing with excitement and nerves. They were used to the city, where the rhythm of life beat fast and hard. Here, in the stillness of the country, they felt bold, overconfident even. They had been watching Farmer Eli for days, studying his routine, convinced they could slip in, grab some tools and cash, and vanish into the night without a trace. They were sure the old farmer wouldn't even know they were there. As they approached, the taller robber, Jake, peered over his shoulder, believing the darkness would shield them from prying eyes. He whispered, his voice laced with a mix of bravado and anxiety. His partner, Sam, nodded, glancing nervously at the farmhouse looming ahead, its windows like hollow eyes watching their every move. They crept along the gravel path, the sound crunching under their feet echoing like a warning. Each step felt heavy, aware that their choices were sealing their fate. But all they could think was how easy it would be to make a quick score. Inside the farmhouse, Farmer Eli sat quietly in his old armchair, a small lamp casting a warm, golden glow around him. His weathered hands rested on his knees, fingers stained from years of working the soil. He could feel the change in the air, the strange stillness that settled around his home. Years spent tending his land had sharpened his instincts. He listened intently, picking up the faint sound of footsteps breaking the midnight calm. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He reached for the shotgun leaning against the wall, years of hard work and grit flowing through him. Farmers know the rhythm of nature, but they also know how to defend what is rightfully theirs. "I've seen these tricks before," Eli murmured, a fire igniting in his belly. He had defended his home against storms, wild animals, and the elements. Tonight, he would stand strong against those who sought to take what he had built with his own hands. As he stood, the robbers finally approached the back door of the barn, confidence riding high on a tide of adrenaline. But then they heard it, a faint creak behind them, a sound that froze their blood. Eli took a slow, measured breath, his heart racing but his mind clear. He sneaked toward the back of the barn, one hand gripping the porch railing, the other tightly holding his shotgun. A rush of determination coursed through him. He stepped quietly into the shadows, moving like wind through the trees, focused and ready. The stillness of the night felt alive as both the robbers and the farmer sensed the air shift, anticipation buzzing with electricity. The robbers spun around, panic flooding their eyes. They weren't prepared for a confrontation, let alone with a man they had underestimated. Sam blurted out, his voice shaking, the bravado crumbling like fallen leaves. Eli's vivid blue eyes bore into them, cutting through their disarray like a sharp knife. "You're breaking the law and you're trespassing on my property," he said, his tone unwavering, embodying the weight of knowledge that came from years of hard work. "Come on, man," Jake tried to plead, desperation creeping into his voice. "We don't want any trouble." The plea dripped with the false confidence of kids caught stealing candy. But Eli was no fool. He knew their kind. They were the sort who exploited weakness, hoping to find easy pickings. Eli retorted, his grip firm on the shotgun, its cold metal gleaming ominously in the dim light. Realizing that their deception had unraveled, the robbers exchanged frantic glances, weighing their next moves. Fear swept across their faces as Eli took a step forward, determination etched in every line of his face. He could see how fear had shifted their once confident demeanor, as if their bravado were nothing more than a paper mask. Jake made a sudden move, attempting to dash toward the open barn door, but Eli was quicker, raising the shotgun as a warning. The command rang through the night, a clarion call that echoed in the robbers' hearts. Suddenly, the adrenaline that gave them strength began to fade, replaced by a heavy realization. They were cornered and all their grand plans had come undone. Sam, desperate and aware of the man before them, opened up in a rush. His words tumbled out, a cascade of panic. "We thought we could just grab a few tools and go." Eli lowered the shotgun slightly, taking in the fear written all over their faces. "You didn't think about the consequences, did you?" His voice softened slightly, an unexpected empathy rising from within him. The realization of their choices hit hard as the tension shifted in the air. There was something deeper at play here. Eli recognized that these weren't just robbers. They were lost souls, desperate for a way out of their own struggles. He knew all too well what that felt like. He'd weathered storms, faced losses, watched neighbors fall into despair. "Look," he said, his firm voice steadying, "I don't want to ruin your lives." Jake glanced around, grappling with the gravity of their situation, his bravado faltering for good. We just thought we could survive," he admitted, the weight of vulnerability replacing the arrogance in his stance. Eli took a step back, lowering his weapon as he let the words hang in the air. He could feel the desperation radiating from them, a reminder of times he had faced similar fears, though he had risen to meet them rather than run away. "I get it," he replied, his voice resolute. "But there are better ways." The early morning sun began to warm the horizon, casting a golden light across the fields. In that moment, Eli saw a light flicker within the robbers' eyes, a glimmer of hope. Maybe they hadn't thought they would encounter understanding tonight. Maybe they thought they'd just find an easy way to a brighter future. And if you think you can go on this way, you're mistaken, Eli continued, the strength in his voice unwavering. You're better than this. Jake and Sam exchanged glances, the familiar spark of confidence they had felt earlier wavering under the weight of his words. Without sharing a single word, they understood the gravity of the choice that lay before them. Eli stood firm, a beacon of guidance in a moment clouded with uncertainty. Slowly, Sam nodded, almost imperceptibly. "All right, we'll go," he murmured, shame washing over him like a wave. Eli watched as they turned away, back stiff with the gravity of their decision. Footsteps echoing through the barnet was a departure marked not just by running away, but by a chance to turn their lives around. The morning sun bathed the earth in warmth, a new beginning stretching out before them. As they retreated into the distance, Eli felt an unexpected weight lift from his shoulders. His heart, once heavy with tension, now light with a certain kind of hope. He hadn't just defended his home, he had opened a door for redemption, a foil of change woven through the threads of desperation. The sun climbed higher as the day began in earnest, the beauty of the fields alive with color, the promise of a rich harvest looming on the horizon. Eli returned to his chores, planting seeds with a newfound strength, knowing he had stood steadfast against both danger and despair. Word spread through the town about the encounter, and soon the tale was told not just as a warning but as a lesson about hard work, respect, and the power of a second chance. Jake and Sam, despite the shame that followed them, chose to make different decisions, seeking to work honestly, learning the true value of labor. And as the seasons changed, Eli continued to thrive, not merely as a farmer but as a guardian of his land and community. He hosted gatherings, shared stories over warm meals, and offered support to those who struggled. It became clear that he hadn't just won against thieves. He had sown seeds of compassion that rippled through the hearts around him. The field stretched endlessly, shimmering in the sunlight, a portrait of resilience. Each stalk of corn stood tall, a testament to life's unwavering spirit. Eli knew that true strength didn't merely lie in protecting territory, but in nurturing hope, building trust, and forging right paths through life's darkest shadows. And though Jake and Sam had come with intentions to steal, they left with something far more precious, a realization that what they truly sought could not be taken. It must be earned, nurtured, and cherished, just like the crops blooming in the vast expanse of the farm. Farmer Eli stood on the porch of his home, watching the sunset cast a golden hue over the fields. It was a painting of human resilience, the kind of beauty that grows in the soil we tend, the values we embrace, and the connections we create along the way. This was the life he fought for, every single day, and he was proud to defend it. The night was as still as a whisper, the air thick with anticipation. Somewhere in the shadows, two figures crouched low, their breaths shallow as they surveyed the old farmhouse bathed in moonlight. They were robbers, but not just any robbers. They were seasoned at their game, confident in their ability to outsmart anyone who stood in their way. They believed that a farmer with his worn hands and weathered face would be an easy target. "Look at this place," Jake said, a smirk spreading across his face. The farmhouse stood silent with its cracked windows and creaky door. "We'll be in and out in no time." His partner, Sam, nodded, though a flicker of doubt played in his chest. They had done this before, but somehow this felt different. As they edged closer, memories of a simpler life seemed to emerge from the shadows. Jake and Sam had grown up in a world where getting by wasn't easy. Their parents worked long hours for little pay, teaching them the value of hard work, but also the desperation that arose when things got tight. The promise of a quick score danced in front of them, blinding their judgment as they approached the old barn behind the house. Farmer Eli, meanwhile, was wide awake in his creaky armchair, the golden glow of a single lamp illuminating the lines etched in his face. He had spent years cultivating that land, pouring his soul into the soil. The world outside might have faded into quiet, but Eli's instincts were sharp. He could feel the tension in the air, a heavy feeling that made the hair on his neck stand up. He leaned forward, listening intently. The soft patter of feet on gravel reached his ears, sending a tingle of awareness through him. He had seen trouble before, from wild animals to nature's fury, and he wasn't about to let anyone take what was rightfully his. That land was not just where he lived. It was his heartbeat, the very essence of his life. As Jake and Sam reached the barn, they exchanged glances, their hearts racing with a mix of fear and excitement. "Let's get what we need and get out," Jake whispered, glancing left and right, looking for any sign of trouble. He pushed the barn door open, the creak echoing ominously into the night. Inside, they could barely make out the shapes of tools hanging from the wall, and the smell of aged wood mingled with something earthy and alive. But as they rummaged through piles of rusted metal and forgotten relics, their nerves began to creep in, eroding their confidence. Jake grabbed an old tool, holding it up like a trophy. "This could fetch a good price," he announced, grinning. But Sam was less enthusiastic. "Maybe we should think about this," he said, glancing nervously around. Jake rolled his eyes, kicking a can across the floor. "You worry too much. Let's just finish this and move on." What they didn't realize was that Eli had already moved. Stepping lightly but purposefully, he slipped out of the house and approached the barn, rifle in hand. Every farmer had his secrets, and Eli's was knowing how to protect his land and livelihood from those who thought they could take advantage of him. As he reached the barn, he paused, listening to the muffled chatter of the robbers inside. "They think they're clever," he thought, feeling a spark of indignation rise within him. Eli didn't just see a couple of thieves. He saw a moment to teach a lesson, a chance to defend everything he cherished. With all the stealth of a seasoned protector, he crept up beside the barn, the wooden walls creaking softly as he pressed against them. He thought to himself, weighing the potential consequences of his next actions. Should he confront them directly or wait to catch them red-handed? Just then, Sam cursed loudly as he stumbled over a loose board. The sound echoed into the night, sending a jolt of adrenaline through both of them. "SHH," Jake hissed, but even he felt the shift in the air. Eli's heartbeat quickened, readying himself for the moment of truth. Suddenly, Eli stepped into the barn, lifting the rifle. His voice rang out deep and steady, slicing through the chaos of the night like a hot knife through butter. Jake and Sam froze, eyes wide, the light from Eli's rifle illuminating their shocked faces. Panic surged through them. They had expected an easy target, not a confrontation. Jake scrambled to find words, clutching the tool like a lifeline. "We were just, looking for help," he stuttered, desperation creeping into his voice. Eli shook his head, disappointment etched across his features. "Help! You're trespassing, stealing what doesn't belong to you." He stepped forward, the rifle steady in his grip, its presence a silent acknowledgement of his readiness to defend what was his. Sam's voice quivered as he pleaded, "We didn't mean to cause any trouble." Eli's resolve hardened, every fiber of his being refusing to back down. "You think you can roll into someone's life and take what they've spent years building?" The words hung heavy in the air, the weight of truth settling upon them like a thick fog. Eli had poured blood, sweat, and tears into his farm. It wasn't just about crops and tools, it was about a legacy, a life's work to provide for his family and community. What happened next surprised everyone. The tension in the room shifted, transforming from fear into an unexpected vulnerability. Sam, filled with shame, looked at Eli and said, "You're right. We thought we could get away with it. We just..." There was a long pause, every heartbeat marked by the gravity of their situation. Eli studied the two young men before him, wrestling with their choices like a storm tearing through the sky. They weren't just thieves. They were lost souls, desperate for a way out of their struggles. Eli lowered his rifle slightly, enough to communicate a willingness to listen, but not far enough to lose his authority. "What you need to understand is that there are consequences for your actions," he said, his voice steady yet compassionate. "Life isn't about shortcuts." Jake looked down, shame coursing through him. "We thought we could just take it and it would be easy." His voice faltered, the realization of their failed plan cutting through his bravado. Eli took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their desperation pressing against him. "This world is tough," he shared, the lines of his face softening. "I know what it's like to struggle, but stealing won't help you find your way. Instead, you can make a choice." Their eyes widened as they processed his words. It dawned on them that this farmer wasn't just a barrier to their goals. He was a person who understood their plight, urging them to see the consequences of their choices. Sam managed to ask, hope and mistrust mingling in his voice. "I need help around the farm," Eli replied, his eyes holding a steady gaze. "You can choose to leave and come back tomorrow to work and I'll pay you for your labor, but if you take that path, it means that you work hard." Jake glanced at Sam, the weight of their choice hanging in the air. "You'd really do that?" he asked, disbelief coloring his tone. Eli met their eyes, unwavering. "Yes, I would." Sam's shoulders relaxed slightly. "We'll do it," he said quietly, looking back at Jake. "I want to try." Eli nodded slowly, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "All right then. But remember, trust is earned and you must prove yourselves. Come back at first light." As the two made their way toward the barn doors, the tension had shifted entirely. Fear was replaced with the possibility of new beginnings. They stepped outside, the cool night air rushing to greet them, imbued with the weight of their choices. The next morning came with the soft light of dawn breaking through the fields, illuminating the promise of a new day. Farmer Eli stood by the porch, watching as Jake and Sam approached with trepidation, their faces a mix of anxiety and determination. Eli asked, a trace of a smile creeping onto his lips. The robbers nodded slowly, the fear of their previous choices replaced with the thrill of a new opportunity. "We're ready," Jake replied, his voice steadier now, the apprehension bleeding away with each step he took. Over the next few weeks, the three worked side by side, the farmer showing them the ropes of tending the land. They learned how to plant crops, tackle maintenance issues, and even how to care for the animals. Each day, they arrived early and left late, sweat dripping down their brows but smiles growing on their faces. With each task completed, Jake and Sam felt the burdens of their past choices lifting, replaced by pride in achievements earned. Eli guided them, a steadfast mentor, offering wisdom that bubbled under the surface of their new friendship. They began sharing their own stories, tales of struggle and dreams for a future they hadn't dared to imagine. As harvest time approached, the fields came alive with color. The fruits of their labor shimmered under the sun, and with it, a newfound respect blossomed. Jake and Sam were no longer two young men lost in a desperate world. They were workers, partners in a shared dream. The day of harvest arrived, the warm sun casting golden rays on the abundant crops. Eli stood at the edge of the field, looking at the blossoming produce as a wave of satisfaction washed over him. The two young men stood beside him, proud and accomplished. "You did good work," Eli praised, a warmth in his voice. It was a moment of validation that struck deep, wiping away the remnants of shame that once plagued them. In that moment, it hit them. They had transformed, standing in their own strength rather than hiding behind shadows and delinquency. And as they filled baskets with corn and beans, they looked over their shoulders, realizing the shadows were gone. Jake turned to Eli, gratitude flooding his voice. "Thank you for giving us a chance," he said earnestly. Eli smiled and nodded, a proud glint in his eyes. "You earned it. Remember this feeling." With the sun setting on the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant colors, Farmer Eli recognized that he had not only protected his land but had nourished new lives and aspirations. Eli watched as the two young men moved confidently among the rows of crops, no longer filled with the weight of regret but with the promise of what could be. They had started as thieves, but through hard work and understanding, they had blossomed into something far greater. Life in the country persisted, each day rising with the sun and setting with hope. And in that farmhouse, a bond had formed, not just one of farmer and laborers, but of mentors and sons, a family stitched together through the resilience of the human spirit. As night fell once more, stars twinkled overhead, a gentle reminder that darkness can hold so much promise. The farmer stood with a watchful eye upon his fields, knowing that even in the face of trouble, there's always a chance for redemption, growth, and new beginnings. This was no mere story of thieves caught in the act. It was about the strength of perseverance, the power of compassion, and the undeniable truth that sometimes life gives you the chance to turn it all around. The night air was thick with tension, as two shadows crept along the edge of Farmer Tom's property, cloaked in darkness and arrogance. They thought they had it all figured out. John and Pete had spent weeks watching Tom's routines, convinced that they could swoop in and out of his old farmhouse without a soul being the wiser. After all, how clever could a farmer really be? "Look at that place," John whispered, his eyes glinting with anticipation as he motioned to the dimly lit farmhouse nestled amidst sprawling fields. "We're about to become rich, my friend." Pete, the more anxious of the two, hesitated. "What if he catches us?" "Relax," John shot back, a smirk plastered across his face. "He's old, he's probably asleep." With that, the thrill of adventure pushed aside Pete's doubts, and the two robbers edged closer, hearts racing with the thrill of the heist. Meanwhile, Farmer Tom sat quietly in his living room, the soft flicker of a lamp illuminating his weathered face. He could feel the stillness of the night pressing in on him. Years spent working the land had sharpened his instincts, allowing him to sense something was off. It was more than just the usual sounds of the countryside. It was a disturbance that sent a shiver down his spine. He glanced out the window, eyeing the long gravel path leading to the barn. He murmured to himself, planting his hands firmly on his knees. With a swift motion, he lifted the rifle resting beside him, an assurance that he was ready for whatever lay ahead. Outside, John and Pete approached the barn, hearts racing with the thrill of what they believed would be an easy score. The heavy door creaked ominously as they pushed it open, stepping inside to the musty scent of hay and wood. They could barely see, but the outlines of tools dotting the walls lit up their imaginations with visions of wealth. "Keep an eye out," John whispered, rummaging through a pile of old equipment. His fingers brushed against the cool metal of tools, the thrill of discovery fueling their overconfidence. "Dude, I can't help but feel like we shouldn't be here," Pete muttered, glancing anxiously toward the barn door. "Just grab what you can," John dismissed, too intoxicated by the adrenaline rushing through him to heed Pete's concerns. "I see a few good shovels and a couple of rakes." But as they rummaged through the layers of dust and memories, an uninvited chill washed over the barn. Something was shifting in the air, a tension building in the shadows. They were so consumed by their plans that they didn't hear Farmer Tom creeping closer, every step calculated as he approached the entrance. The moment was electric. John held a rusty shovel triumphantly when suddenly, an unexpected voice erupted from behind them. Both robbers spun around, eyes wide, shock crashing over them like a wave. John's grip on the shovel tightened, but fear swiftly replaced his bravado. There stood Farmer Tom, rifle in hand, steady and unwavering, a look of fierce determination on his face. We were just," John started, stumbling over his words. Tom interrupted, his voice firm with authority. "Stealing from me? You think I wouldn't notice?" Panic coursed through the robbers as Tom continued. "You have no idea how hard I've worked to build this farm, and you're here trying to take from it." The shock of being caught had stripped them of any semblance of their initial confidence. John glanced at Pete, desperation turning his voice raw. "Look, we're sorry." Tom took a step forward. "Sorry doesn't cut it. You guys are trespassing and committing a crime." The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. John's heart raced, the thrill of the heist evaporating into nothingness. Pete shifted uncomfortably, realizing the reality of the situation crashing down around them. The farmer was not just a simple man. He was an embodiment of strength, resilience, and the spirit of hard work. Tom let the silence linger, watching as the two men fidgeted under the pressure of their predicament. He wasn't just a farmer. He was a guardian of the land, and he would not back down. "Please don't do that," Pete pleaded, his voice trembling. "We just needed some money." Tom crossed his arms, his expression softening ever so slightly. "I know tough times, believe me." A moment passed, heavy with uncertainty. Tom studied the two young men before him, realizing they weren't just adversaries. They were lost souls looking for a way out of desperation. How many times had he seen that in others? The thought ignited a flicker of compassion within him. "Here's the deal," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of kindness. "You can either walk away right now, and you'll leave empty-handed, or you can work for me." John and Pete exchanged glances, the gravity of their choices weighing heavily in the silence. Both had come in expecting an easy score, but here was this farmer offering them something they never imagined, a chance for redemption. Tom prompted, his eyes locked on theirs, willing them to make a choice. Pete asked, genuine confusion etched across his face. Because I believe that everyone deserves a second chance, Tom replied. And sometimes people make mistakes. You're at a crossroads right now. With the dawn breaking outside, the soft light spilling into the barn like a promise of new beginnings, John and Pete stood in that moment of revelation. They had come to steal, but instead they were faced with an opportunity that would shape their destinies. After a long pause, John nodded slowly. As Tom lowered his rifle, a weight lifted from the air, replaced by a hint of hope. Good choice, he said. But remember, trust is earned. The next day, as the sun rose over the golden fields, Tom introduced them to the daily chores on the farm. It was hard work, but the satisfaction of completing each task replaced the initial anxiety. They began to find rhythm in the long days of sweat and labor, hand in hand with the realization that they were capable of much more than they had believed. Week by week, as time passed, they learned the ropes. They shoveled dirt, repaired fences, and tended to the livestock. Eli watched closely, his expectations clear but fair, guiding them as if they were his own sons. The lessons he imparted weren't just about farming. They were about respect, responsibility, and the value of hard work. Despite the initial chaos of the entry into their lives, they found camaraderie in their shared struggle. Their laughter echoed through the fields and their bond grew. They started opening up to Tom, sharing stories of their own lives, loves, and regrets. The more they worked, the more they transformed, shedding the identities of robbers in favor of becoming honest laborers. One evening, after a long day, Tom gave them a moment of praise. "You two have come a long way," he said, resting his hands on his hips, a proud smile breaking across his weathered face. John felt a warmth spread through his chest. "We appreciate it, Tom. In this life, it's not about where you start, it's about where you choose to go," Tom replied, the wisdom in his voice echoing through the fading sunlight. As the weeks turned into months, the harvest season approached, and with it came abundance. The fields shimmered with golden corn, leaves ready to embrace the sun. They stood together, backs straight, hearts swelling with pride, knowing that they had found purpose in their labor. On the day of the harvest, the excitement in the air crackled like electricity. Together, they gathered the bounty of the fields, the fruits of their collective labor filling baskets and trucks. The farm had become not just a job, but a home, a place of growth, laughter, and fresh starts. Tom watched the two young men with pride as they worked beside him. The journey from thieves to teammates had been a transformation, both fierce and beautiful. They had proven themselves not just to him, but to themselves. They had reclaimed their lives and stepped into the light of possibility. As sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, John and Pete gathered around Tom. "Thank you for believing in us," John said, his voice full of sincerity. Tom nodded, the warmth of their transformation filling his heart. "You both worked hard for this." That evening, amidst the fading light, Tom shared tales of his own life, the struggles, the victories, and the lessons learned along the way. Laughter erupted as they exchanged stories under the starlit sky, the bonds forged in the soil stronger than any criminal history could ever break. The sounds of the night wrapped around them like a warm blanket, promising hope and new beginnings. And as the shadows danced across the fields, it was no longer a tale of robbers who thought they could outsmart a farmer. It was a story of redemption, resilience, and the undeniable strength of the human spirit. In the end, it was about the power to choose, the choice to rise above the darkness and carve a new path etched in hard-earned integrity. It was a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to life-changing journeys, and every second chance is a gift waiting to be embraced. The night was quieter than a secret shared between friends, a blanket of stillness draping over Farmer Frank's sprawling estate. The moon peeked cheekily through the clouds, casting a silver glow over the fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the heart of that quiet, two figures slinked toward the farmhouse, cloaked in shadows and confidence. They had spent weeks planning this heist, convinced that a simple farmer would be no match for their cunning. "Look at that place," murmured Rick, the taller of the two, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Just a few tools and a bit of cash." His heart raced, but it wasn't just with adrenaline. It was a heady mixture of arrogance. His friend Leo, tugged nervously at his sleeve, glancing back toward the tree line as though he could sense the darkness lurking just a bit too close. "They say Frank's got a few tricks up his sleeve," Leo replied, his words barely above a whisper. But the thrill of the chase pushed aside his instincts, drawing him deeper into the dark. Rick shot back, dismissing Leo's concerns. "What's an old farmer going to do?" With that declaration, they crept closer to the barn, their footsteps muffled by the cool earth. Each step intensified their excitement, fueling their overconfidence like gasoline on a fire. Inside the farmhouse, Frank sipped coffee, the steam curling up into the air like whispers of distant memories. The soft ticking of a clock filled the silence. It was a sound he had come to cherish over the years, a rhythm meeting the heartbeat of the land outside. But tonight, something felt different. He could feel a disturbance in the air, a sense of something amiss. As he glanced out the window, he saw them shadows flitting toward his barn. Instantly, his instincts kicked in. Frank had seen years of struggle and triumph, a lifetime spent working the fields under the sun. Time had taught him to recognize trouble, and tonight was no exception. With deliberate movements, Frank set the cup down. He reached for the hunting rifle hanging on the wall, a sturdy weight that brought him comfort. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of his resolve to protect what he had built with sweat and labor. Outside, Rick and Leo pushed open the barn door, its old hinges creaking like the sound of a warning bell. Inside, the abundance of forgotten tools and rusted machinery lay dormant, covered in the dust of countless seasons. "This place is a gold mine," Rick declared, rushing in without a thought. They did not notice the eyes watching them from the shadows, nor did they feel the chill creeping up the back of their necks. The momentary thrill of discovery sparked a fire in their chests. They began sifting through piles of tools, gathering anything that looked valuable. Just then, Frank stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, the light from the house casting a long shadow across the barn. Steadied himself, surveying the scene before him, two young men, emblems of misguided ambition, oblivious to the guard standing watch over the fruits of his labor. The time had come to make his presence known. "Hey," Frank called, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. The sound echoed sharply in the cool night air, causing both robbers to instinctively freeze. Rick turned, disbelief stark on his face. We were just, he stammered, grasping a shovel like it was both a prize and a shield. Frank replied, stepping off the porch with a steady resolve. Panic flashed across Leo's face as he recognized their precarious position. He blurted, desperation pouring from his words. Frank's eyes narrowed, years of hard work reflected in the depths of his gaze. "Mind? You think I'd just let thieves take what's mine?" The two young men exchanged glances, uncertainty clawing at the edges of their bravado. It wasn't supposed to be like this. They envisioned quick riches, not standing exposed under the firm gaze of a determined farmer. Rick shifted his weight nervously, anger bubbling up to mask his fear. "Come on, just let us go." Frank replied, his voice low and steady, filled with the kind of authority that comes from years of experience. "And take my tools with you." A tense silence filled the barn as Rick and Leo realized they were cornered. Frank took a step forward, rifle raised just enough to show he was ready to defend what was his. "I won't ask again," he warned, his voice echoing with a depth that resonated with power. In that moment, the reality of their choices crashed over Rick and Leo like a torrential wave. They weren't seasoned criminals. They were scared, desperate young men who had made a foolish mistake. Leo turned to Rick, his eyes wide with regret. Whispered desperately. All right, we'll leave," Rick said finally, raising his hands in surrender. But it was too late for excuses, and they both knew it. Their bravado had evaporated, leaving them exposed and vulnerable as they stood before the farmer. Frank lowered his rifle slightly, but not out of fear. It was a calculated gesture, a chance for them to reconsider. He said, his tone softer now. "This farm represents years of hard work. I don't just grow crops, I grow hope." For a brief moment, Rick and Leo exchanged glances, uncertainty mingling with something deeper potential perhaps. Frank's words probed through the haze of their desperation, forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions. Leo croaked, his voice unsteady. "I've been where you are," Frank said, his voice laced with understanding. "Times get tough, but stealing won't lead to any real solutions." The silence lingered as the weight of his words settled over them like a heavy fog. "You can leave now, or you can choose to work for me," Frank continued. Rick asked, confusion mixing with vulnerability. "I need help on the farm." The offer hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Both Rick and Leo felt a flicker of hope sparking within. This opportunity was something they hadn't envisioned when they first approached the barn. After a long moment, Leo nodded slowly, the decision settling firmly in his heart. "We'll do it," he said quietly, glancing at Rick for affirmation. Frank studied them closely, looking for sincerity in their eyes. "You sure?" "Yes," Rick confirmed, the reckless abandon that had propelled them into this situation now tempered by a new resolve. The tension in the room dissipated, leaving a fragile hope hanging in the air. Frank lowered his rifle completely, realizing that he had made a choice too, one rooted in compassion rather than revenge. "Then get out of my barn and come back in the morning," he instructed. "And for what it's worth, I believe people can change." The next day came with the first light of dawn, illuminating the fields that stretched far and wide, alive with possibility. As Frank prepared for the day ahead, he stood on the porch, taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of the land he had worked so fiercely to protect. John and Leo arrived, their faces still marked with a mixture of determination and uncertainty as they stepped out of their past and into something new. John asked as he approached, hands buried in his pockets. "We get to work," Frank replied, the resolve in his voice unmistakable. "You'll learn about planting and caring for crops, and I'll teach you how to tackle the maintenance and repairs." And so, the days turned into weeks, each sunrise bringing fresh challenges and opportunities for growth. Frank guided the young men, sharing his knowledge with patience and wisdom. They fertilized the fields, tilled the soil, and handled livestock, gaining experience and transformative lessons along the way. As the sweat dripped down their brows and ache settled into their bodies, something deeper began to grow, a sense of purpose. They started to feel pride, not just in their tasks, but in their commitment to change. The land became not just their workplace, but a haven where they could rediscover their worth. One evening, as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Frank turned to his two new apprentices. "You both are doing well, better than I ever expected," he said, an approving nod accompanying his words. Leo's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "We can't thank you enough," he said, sincerity resonating in his voice. With each passing day, the shadows of their past crime faded like the setting sun. Rick and Leo forged a new identity, one built on values learned through hard work and perseverance. They found themselves laughing, sharing stories over the evening meal with Frank, the walls of hesitance eroding as camaraderie grew. As harvest season approached, the fields blossomed under their care, and they stood together on the edge of the crops, the sweet smell of ripened corn wafting through the air. With the sun setting behind them and hope filling their hearts, they knew the day had come to see the fruits of their labor. On that day, the fields echoed with laughter, joy, and the soft sounds of hard work paying off. Frank surveyed his land, pride swelling within him as he recognized the metamorphosis that had taken place. The two young men had transformed from thieves into dedicated workers, ready to reap the rewards of their effort. The day of harvest was marked by exhilaration and fulfillment, the tangible rewards filling their baskets as they gathered the bounty of their shared labor. They had taken a journey, not just physically through the fields, but also emotionally and spiritually toward a fresh start. When the final basket was filled, Frank released contented laughter, clapping Rick and Leo on the back. Underneath the golden sun, in the embrace of the land that had nurtured them, Rick smiled, feeling the weight of his past lift. "We couldn't have done it without you, Frank." Frank's eyes sparkled with warmth. Sometimes it only takes one person to believe in someone else's potential for change, but you two had to do the hard work. As night fell, the stars adorned the dark sky like diamonds scattered over velvet. Frank and the two young men gathered around the porch, reminiscing and sharing stories, woven with threads of laughter and shared experiences. It was no longer a tale of robbers who thought they could outsmart a farmer. It was a story of redemption, resilience, and the beautiful power of second chances. Together, they had transformed not just themselves, but the very essence of what the land represented. In the end, they discovered that no matter the darkness one might find themselves lost within, there's always a path back to the light, a chance to contribute to something greater. They had built a new legacy, one rooted in hard-earned respect and the promise of tomorrow. And as they sat beneath the canopy of stars, they understood the truth: changing one's fate is possible when grounded in hard work, integrity, and the willingness to embrace hope. The wind howled through the fields like a warning cry, rustling the crops under the pale light of the full moon. In the distance, shadows moved stealthily across the landscape, two figures weaving between the tall cornstalks, their hearts pounding with the thrill of their unlawful intent. They had determined this night would change everything. They believed they would outsmart Farmer Bill, a man they thought was just a simple, old farmer, too naive to catch on. "Just grab what we need and we're out," Jake whispered, a smirk playing on his lips as he surveyed the small farmhouse. His partner, Tom, swallowed hard. "You really think we can just walk in and take whatever we want?" Jake shot back, rolling his eyes. He had fed off the thrill of the heist for weeks, imagining the riches that would come with a few stolen tools and maybe even cash from the old farmer's drawer. They approached the barn, dusty and weather-worn, yet holding promises of forgotten treasures. Tom hesitated, glancing back at the house, where light flickered in the windows, a sign of the farmer still awake. "I don't like this." "Don't be such a coward," Jake snapped, nudging open the creaking barn door. "We'll be fine." Inside, the darkness enveloped them like a heavy cloak. The air was thick with dust and the earthy fragrance of hay, a reminder of the countless hours the farmer had spent here. The shadows danced as Jake flicked on his flashlight, revealing an assortment of rusty tools hung on the walls. Jake exclaimed, rushing to grab a shovel. He felt invincible, as if the night belonged to them, but Tom wasn't feeling the same rush. His heart was pounding, not from excitement but a growing sense of dread. Suddenly, a sound disturbed the silence, the unmistakable crunch of gravel underfoot. Tom's panic rose, his instincts screaming that they were in over their heads. He whispered urgently, "Relax, it's probably just a raccoon or something," Jake retorted, dismissing him and continuing his search. With each passing moment, the tension in the air thickened, seeming to pulse with the heartbeat of the night. Meanwhile, Farmer Bill stood on his porch, coffee cup in hand, eyes scanning the yard. He felt the change in the air, that heavy blanket of silence broken only by fleeting sounds echoing from the barn. Years of farming had honed his instincts. He felt the kind of stillness that precedes trouble. "Not tonight," he murmured to himself, determination firing up within him. Bill had worked this land for decades, weathering storms, droughts, and more. He wasn't about to let a couple of thieves undermine everything he had built. With steely resolve, he set his coffee aside and grabbed his old shotgun from the wall. This wasn't the first time he had dealt with intruders, and he knew exactly what to do. He moved toward the barn, careful and silent, ready to confront whatever awaited him inside. Back inside the barn, tension mounted as the shadow of dread crept closer to Tom. "I really think we should go," he whispered, glancing nervously toward the barn door. "Just a little longer," Jake insisted, rummaging through a dusty toolbox. "We're so close. We just need to grab a few more things," and then before he could finish, the barn door swung open with a creak, and there stood Farmer Bill, shotgun leveled and a fierce look on his face. He thundered, the authority in his voice echoing off the barn walls like a thunderclap. Panic surged through them. Tom stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a broken crate, while Jake's bravado evaporated like mist. The realization that they had been caught struck like lightning. Jake stammered, dropping the toolbox and raising his hands in surrender. The flashlight beam shook wildly as his hands trembled, illuminating the fear etched across his face. "Stealing from me," Bill finished for him, stepping forward, the rifle steady in his grasp, a steely resolve bathing him in courage. Tom swallowed hard, his fear morphing into desperation. "Look, we didn't mean to cause any trouble. We just thought—" "What?" Bill interrupted, his voice booming with indignation. Jake's heart raced, the fear of consequences crashing over him like a cold wave. This was not how the night was supposed to unfold. He blurted, desperation creeping into his tone. Bill echoed, his brow furrowing. Borrow implies you'd actually bring them back. What's to stop you from just... Tom, caught in a whirlwind of panic, looked to Jake for reassurance. He whispered, trembling. Bill watched them closely, noting the raw fear that hung in the air like smoke. You two have a choice to make, he said, lowering the shotgun slightly but keeping it aimed. The truth in his words paralyzed Jake and Tom. They weren't hardened criminals, they were frightened young men who had made a foolish mistake. But what did it mean to face those consequences? I don't want to go to jail, Tom admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Bill took a deep breath as he read the situation, every instinct steering him toward what felt right. If you want to stay, he said slowly, you need to work. For a brief moment, stunned silence enveloped the barn. The air was thick with uncertainty. Tom exchanged glances with Jake, the fear of being caught battling against the unusual glimmer of hope offered by the farmer. Could this be a second chance? Jake finally asked, eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Bill's eyes softened for a moment. Yes, work. You can help me with repairs, planting, and the harvest, but you'll have to prove yourself. Tom asked, disbelief evident in his tone. Because everyone deserves a second chance, Bill replied. I've had my own struggles. They stood there, the weight of his words settling in, a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. It could go either way, a choice between fear and redemption. Finally, Jake nodded, uncertainty still flickering in his eyes. Good, Bill said, lowering his rifle completely. Then come back at first light. As the sun began to peek over the horizon the following day, casting warm rays into the morning chill, Jake and Tom stood on the porch, anxiously waiting for Farmer Bill. Their hearts raced with a mix of excitement and fear. Could they truly prove themselves worthy of trust? Bill stepped outside, exchanging brief nods of acknowledgement with the two young men before leading them to the fields. No one said farming was easy, he explained, gesturing to the vast patches of soil ahead of them. It's about discipline, hard work, and knowing that every effort pays off in the end. They nodded, determination replacing the doubt that once clouded their minds. Let's do this, Tom said, his voice steady now, grounded in purpose. Over the weeks that followed, the rhythm of life on the farm began to change. The days were long and the work hard, but with each task, Jake and Tom learned. They planted seeds, mended fences, and harvested crops. Each drop of sweat poured out not just effort but hope, slowly but surely transforming their story. But as they toiled under the sun, a different tension brewed just beneath the surface. Doubts lingered like storm clouds, thoughts of their previous lives gnawing at them, whispering reminders of their mistakes. What if Farmer Bill found out they were just pretending? What if they were never capable of truly changing? One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, the three of them gathered around a bonfire, sharing stories of the days gone by, each word weaving a closer bond of trust. But just as they started to laugh and relax, a noise cut through the quiet of night. The distant rumble of a truck engine approached, tires crunching over gravel drawing closer. Bill instantly tensed, his instincts kicking in. Stay here, he instructed sharply, moving toward the edge of the glow. Tom's heart raced, a sickening feeling churning in his stomach as dread washed over him. He whispered to Jake. I don't know, Jake replied, anxiety creeping into his voice. They watched as the headlights illuminated the far side of the barn, revealing a group of men stepping out of the truck. The air grew heavy with tension, and Farmer Bill's demeanor shifted. He was no longer the calm, collected farmer they had come to admire. He was now a sentinel ready to protect what was his. Stay back, Bill warned, raising his voice as the men approached, wiry figures shrouded in darkness. One of the men shouted back, a sick grin curving his lips, eyes gleaming with malice. Jake and Tom exchanged alarmed glances, realizing just how tense the situation had become. Tom whispered, Whatever it is, it's not good, Jake murmured, heart racing as Farmer Bill took a step forward, his rifle gripping tightly in his hands. Get back in your vehicle, Bill commanded. But the men laughed, stepping closer, a sense of hostility hanging in the air like a storm cloud about to unleash its fury. Jake felt a chill creep down his spine. This was a whole different kind of confrontation. Then came a sudden eruption of chaos. A scuffle ignited. The sharp crack of a gunshot pierced the tension-filled air, sending shockwaves through all three men. Bill shouted, empowering Jake and Tom with adrenaline. Panic surged within them as the night unfolded into a battle of survival. And in that moment, everything spiraled and their destinies hung in the balance. As Farmer Bill faced the intruders, Jake and Tom instinctively backed away toward the barn, drawn into the shadows, hearts pounding against their ribs. They had chosen a different path, forged a new life, and now it was all at stake. The night that was supposed to mark their redemption had turned into a fight for survival, where every choice would determine not just their future but Farmer Bill's as well. And as chaos erupted around them, they faced an awakening that would alter the course of their lives forever. Would they stand with Farmer Bill or retreat into the darkness? The answers loomed heavy in the air as the echoes of the night transformed their story into one of unforeseen consequences. They stood at a crossroads that would define who they could become. In that moment, everything changed.